Actually, the top professionals that I've worked with in my career, money was probably secondary to. It was recognition, it was achievement, it was accomplishment, it was respect of their peers. I found most people were happiest and most motivated and the hardest working when they themselves felt that they were growing, and they themselves felt that they were on a route to something. If I have a coaching appointment with one of my reps and you ask me to drop it and do something else, I'm going to say, because the single most important meeting that my rep has every week isn't with a customer.
How do we build systems around different types of rewards if it's not tied to numbers or spiffs or anything? How do you, being unbiased, if you will, to say, okay, this person needs to be recognized, especially when you have larger organizations?
Great question. I guess there's probably two.
Hey, Ian, how's it going, my friend?
Pretty good. Good to see you, Michael.
Good to see you too. Look, before we start, just tell us a little bit about your background and what you're working on these days.
Sure. So, background is I grew up in Dublin, Ireland, live in Northern California now. I do two things. I train and enable salespeople, and I look after dogs that are in need. So my wife and I run a small nonprofit where we take high-risk dogs, we rehabilitate them, and find them a good home.
I love that. I have a rescue dog myself, so it's always great to see, people care. All right. So, Ian, you rescued what, 200 dogs or
Yeah,
even
over
more?
250 at this point, yeah.
There you go. And probably you work with a lot of struggling humans in the past as well. So, how do you coach a burnout rep back to baseline?
So it's really about environment. There's a lot of similarities in dog training and in human training or sales training. It starts with the environment, right? So it's got to be a positive, warm, safe environment. Just like a great sales team, people feel happy to speak up. Well, our dogs act out because they've had some trauma in the past. They've had some things to deal with. We are on a 9-acre property, which is fenced and created really specifically for making it a comfortable place for rehabilitating dogs. So they got a lot of space. They can burn up a lot of energy. We've got plenty of lakes and rivers nearby where we live. So, they get the exercise that they need as well. And then it's repetition being the mother of skill, just like in, any other kind of training, right? It's relentlessness. It's patience. It's a big part of it. Again, as a former CEO, I appreciated the patience piece probably a little better than some. And it's rewarding. It's really the thing that makes me happiest. 35-year career in technology now, and yet there's nothing I would rather do, honestly, than hang out with a mangy, flea-ridden dog for 2 hours until I feel a bit better.
So anyway, let me ask you this: how did you actually get into this? Because this is always fascinating to hear these stories.
So I've always loved dogs. My grandmother actually bred Rhodesian Ridgebacks. So from when I was a child, I can remember these
Great
insanely
dogs, yeah.
well-trained dogs being around. And then a career in technology. And when I was living in San Francisco, I joined a company you probably know, MongoDB, and it was the first time that they were allowed a dog-friendly office. I'd never worked anywhere where there was a dog-friendly office. So immediately I thought, well, that sounds good. So we went off, and my wife and I, and we fostered a dog, thinking that because our apartment didn't allow pets, but we thought, if we're sneaky about it and we say it's just a temporary foster, probably they'll let us away with it. Anyway, that was our first foster fail. Harry, still with me today, 12 years later. He's welcomed all 250 something odd dogs through our door and make them feel comfortable and healthy and happy. So started off as just volunteer fostering, and then that became, really a passion because we had so many successes and seen so many people happy with their, with their new companions and dogs that were going to be euthanized that day. Here we are 10 years later. I get photographs and Christmas cards from those adopters.
Mm.
So really, it was the spiritual income part of it that just, my wife and I don't have children, so the dogs are like our children.
That's amazing, man. You're saving lives, and this is really great that you started as a foster, family, and right now, what you're doing this full time, I guess. You work with a lot of great companies, and obviously these are global teams. You help larger organizations. What are some of the common traps sales enablement teams fall into when scaling globally that you can compare with, someone who's actually taking care of dogs?
Yeah. Well, for the most part, I've been training revenue professionals, so salespeople, account managers, solution engineers, biz dev reps, that kind of stuff. And as you know, all of those people are rewarded by commissions and spiffs and bonuses and things like that. So training dogs is very much a treat reward system. You know this yourself, right? I'll bet you your little guy, if you've got something tasty in your hand, is sitting pretty in front of you and being polite and, the way they do. So there are some similarities there in the rewards, but in particular, what I found, and this is why my book is called Rescuing Dogs and Salespeople, because I believe salespeople need to be rescued quite a lot as well. The police dogs and drug sniffing dogs and bomb sniffing dogs, they are not treated with sweets. They're treated with a toy, usually a conker, a ball, some kind of furry toy. And that's their reward. And the dog wants recognition for doing a good job, not necessarily food all the time. We always think that, put a nice piece of chicken in and the dog will do anything. Well, actually, you can train a dog to be just as excited and happy over a tennis ball or some kind of toy. And I really found this with salespeople too. I loathe the fact that people say, oh, all salespeople are coin operators, and they're simply motivated by money and they just want to run off over the horizon with bags of money. And, actually the top professionals that I've worked with in my career, money was probably secondary to them. It was recognition, it was achievement, it was accomplishment, it was respect of their peers that really, really made them feel good. And that was something that I think a lot of sales leaders get wrong. It's say we need some extra revenue this quarter, throw a spiff out there, right? I ran a software company myself for 12 years, and we had an awards show each year, if you like, sort of almost like the Oscars or the Emmys or something like that. Just a Christmas party, really, but a glorified Christmas party where we had all these different named awards for different things. None of them were for performance. So, we had awards for being the most helpful person on the team, or for going beyond on a particularly difficult account, or for rescuing, a lapsed account or some churned account or something like that. So that was, again, I noticed those people were much more proud of that little glass award and the round of applause that they got than, because by definition, most of them were making pretty good commission checks as well.
This is really interesting, and I think it's very relevant because I'm a seller myself, and I've been doing this for a decade. And to your point, yes, we want to make money. That's why we are in sales. But at the same time, recognition and learning and helping and all these factors, sometimes, leaders don't pay enough attention to. It's all about your seller personas and who you're working with. I'm with you on that. But how do we build systems around different types of rewards if it's not tied to numbers or spiffs or anything? How do you, being unbiased, if you will, to say, okay, this person needs to be recognized, especially when you have larger organizations? How do you build a system around that?
Great question. I guess there's probably two or three slices of that pie. For me, as a sales leader, when I led sales teams, it was about individual needs as opposed to group needs. Obviously you had your sort of foundational level group needs that everybody needed.
Yeah.
But I always made a particular point of trying to get into the individual goals of each of those sales people, right? So I'm a big goal planner, a big guy. Everyone who's ever worked with me has to tell me their 1, 3, and 5 year goals. And of course, I'll help them with those, but they have to have goals. If they're okay sharing their goals with me, then it's, pretty easy to prescribe a training, coaching, mentoring, whatever that may take for that individual. Back to dogs, it's almost the same, right? We have particular goals, like if a dog is sick or it has a particular, emotional problem or something like that, we have a particular goal for the type of a doctor. And I'll give you an example. We had one large dog that came to us a couple of years back, the livestock guardian dog that never been a livestock guardian, not happy in any way and had been mistreated and abused. It is now looking after a couple of hundred goats and sheep on a farm in Northern California.
They approved.
Completely different dog. I'm sorry.
No, I love it. They actually approved it. And it's telling the truth.
There are several around me. I've told them to be quiet, and they've been quite good so far. But yeah, so back to your question, really it's about having the time, and I know not everybody does, but for the personal goals with professionals, right? I'm of the opinion that your career is either design or default, right? It's like default is just, oh, sure, that job over there, okay, if you say so, boss, or oh, really, I'm getting promoted to manager, and I never maybe wanted to be a manager, but that's the way their career worked out. I like to speak with particularly sales reps, at onboarding. And I personally have onboarded a little over 5,000 students across my career. And it's, now is the time to decide what your next role is. You're brand new in the job. What are you going to do 2 years, 3 years from now when you're done with that territory, or you cashed it out, or whatever may happen?
So you start this conversation, let's say in the first 30 days, if you will, at least because you mentioned, onboarding. So you start early on just to understand what they want. What if we are dealing with junior reps who don't actually understand like what the progression in this career might look like?
So that's a great question around startups. I worked at Oracle for 7.5 years, where there was a fairly clear career path and some dog legs you could take too, but it was pretty well set out. You had levels and times that you would do a particular role, achievements you needed. Now, different startups I've worked at, WalkMe, Productive, even Mongo at the time was only a couple of hundred staff. It's really the wild, wild west, isn't it? They haven't
Pretty
yet
much
created their organizations. They don't know whether it's going to be a pure field role or that's going to be inside and field or hybrid. They work that out a lot of times as they grow and as they succeed. So it's definitely much more challenging in that smaller company. I think the type of people who, and I've worked with a lot of them who've come from a Microsoft or Salesforce or something like that, and then they've gone to a startup, cherishing the freedom and independence they think they're going to have as a startup. But a year and a half, 2 years into it, a lot of times they don't see somewhere to go in that particular startup. I'm mostly talking about salespeople and revenue people here, solution engineers, but probably true to say in marketing and in finance and in various other roles as well.
It's very valid because I personally experienced that myself. And even this company was born because of that pain. We kind of like built a V1 playbook, we were selling and everything, seems very glorious. But when it comes to internal, promotions or career path, it was not clear because it was a startup. And to your point, like things were changing really quickly. And I think one thing that sales leaders, revenue leaders can actually consider doing is not overpromising. I know it's really hard to get good talent, and when we have this misalignment, if you will, between recruitment team, they're selling the dream, and then you start working with your leader in a group. They have to follow the same pattern, right? But then you see as a end user or a rep that things are not actually moving forward. If you even bring it up, you see with that speed, it might actually be a threat to your career rather than just helping you actually build that. So what would be your suggestion? Again, most of our audience work at companies, you mentioned Oracle of the world. They're more established. They already have processes in place. But for those who are actually running startups, because we got some folks watching this, Series B, Series C, they're growing extremely fast and they really don't know the career progression really well. How do they communicate this with the talent? But you still want to attract the talent, right? Without actually lying. So is there a way we can do this?
Nothing that I could say would work all the time. I think everything works sometimes, nothing works all the time, is the old saying, right? I ran a company from, me and one other guy up to 50 staff with no funding, no VC, just growing week and month by month. That was back in Ireland in the 90s in what they called the Celtic Tiger. And at that point, I was 23 years old or something. I wasn't even thinking beyond the next 2 or 3 years. I was just like, let's get to the end of this year and see what happens. And at the end of that year, we had some profits, so we invested them and, hired a bunch more people and then had more, et cetera, right? Nowadays, I've never been in a VC-backed company where I was the person spending the VC, so I can't really speak to that with any authority. But I have noticed that some of the smaller companies are, some of the colleagues and the coaches I still run a coaching business for certain reps, and they're getting offered different kinds of incentives now, and not just financial and stock, but they're getting offered, and you're right, it's a promise that not everybody can keep, but they're getting said, well, look, if it works out here and you can hit this revenue this year, we'll give you a team, we'll get you to start hiring a team. I don't know that happens as often as it's suggested it would happen. I certainly have examples where it has. And, I have examples of people who were salespeople for 20 years who switched to product marketing in a startup and were tremendously successful in it. So I think you always have that kind of left turn you can take in a smaller firm that probably not as easy to do in a more established organization.
But just imagine if the company is growing really fast. And by the way, I'm cheating a little bit because I'm running a startup and I'm thinking about like people who work here. I want to make sure that they're happy, they're satisfied, they're growing in their career. And many of these decisions, something to do with, gut feeling of the leader. You come back and say, hey, it seems like this person is killing it. It's been a while. They're doing a great job. Maybe it's time for the next move. The way we run it is a little differently. We want them to grow in their, seat. But at the same time, when we always say this, we hire when we get, hair on fire, because we're a bootstrap company, we are growing. But at the same time, we want to make sure that if we bring someone, it's for a good reason. It's not just to add headcount. Yeah. So this is how we are navigating this. But again, I'm not sure if there is a way that we can say, hey, maybe you can actually look at certain things, at least for this career progression. Or maybe we should say, you know what, if you're joining a startup, good luck. You're at the mercy of the leaders.
Yeah, there should be a warning book that comes with it, or something like that, which is maybe. I've always believed that behavior change only comes when it's really linked to something that's personal and will benefit the individual. Mm-hmm. So, where training and coaching and mentoring is concerned, that's really about adult behavior change. So I've been to some really fantastic training courses where I thought the content was terrific. I thought the methodologies were terrific, and I've been the only person in the room who did. Mm-hmm. And probably vice versa, right? So it's all about whether or not the person who's learning, being coached, developing whatever part of their career they're at, it's really about whether or not it will personally help them. And I don't mean just with a paycheck. And that's been my experience 35 years now in technology. I found most people were happiest and most motivated and the hardest working when they themselves felt that they were growing. And they themselves felt that they were on a route to something, right? I'm sure you've experienced this too. I worked with a chap called Cyrus at a previous startup. And here's a guy who has ultra-focused goals, right? Doesn't matter what company he's in, that he's changed companies a couple of times, that kind of thing, but he's ultra-focused on his goals. He knows exactly what he wants to do. I used to run this kind of odd Monday morning exercise, maybe odd, maybe not, where I would tell everyone on my team, okay, guys, here's what happened yesterday. You just won the lottery. You're right now sitting on $5 million in cash. You don't need to work anymore. What's the first thing you're going to buy? Nobody's ever thought that through. Well, guys usually say a Ferrari or something like that, right? I find women really don't. They're like, well, I'd have to really think about that for a while, Or, you're independently wealthy now. You sold your VC, you sold your company. What are you going to do all day? What's going to make you happy all day? And this is rather how my wife and I started the dog rescue. My wife is a nurse. We thought, well, what will make us happy? If we didn't have to work, what would make us happy? And I was like, hanging around with dogs all day makes me happy. So, I've joked literally that if I did win the lottery, I'd just go to the local shelter and empty it. Give me them all. I'll take them all home. We'll build a new shelter here for them and they'll live here for the rest of their days. So tapping into what it is that truly makes people happy and truly, makes them feel fulfilled is the best motivator I've ever found.
You know what I love about this? It's so simple. It's so simple. But it requires, real leadership. So you get on these one-on-one calls, which many people say, hey, I don't have the bandwidth for. And during maybe that 30 days, first 30, 60 days of onboarding, really get to know people by asking simple questions. You just imagine money is no problem. What would you do? Like here, this company or another company, and why? What this is so important to you or so fascinating to you? Do you believe your reps burn leads practicing on client calls? When it comes to giving them one-on-one coaching sessions, you just don't have the bandwidth, so you get rid of them altogether? Or maybe you notice that your team spends a lot of time on non-revenue tasks like taking notes, updating CRM, or drafting emails. These are the exact challenges we solve for other revenue leaders like yourself. With Sell Me the Spend AI Coach, you can offer your reps role-play sessions sessions at scale while automating one-on-one coaching sessions based on your best practices and methodology. Also, AI will take care of all their non-revenue tasks, like note-taking, CRM updates, draft the email for them, so they can focus on constant improvement while you're focusing on one thing and one thing only: revenue growth. If you're interested in learning more about the clients we are working with or use cases that might be beneficial to you, check us out at sellmethespend.ai. And look, you said something interesting. You said nobody actually talked about, when I talk about money, says $5 million, what would you do? They didn't know even what they want to do with it. And that's a validation to what you said earlier, that not everybody's money motivated. Yes, they want to grow and make money in financial freedom and all that stuff just really do matter. But at the end of the day, when you ask this simple question and they have to think about it, it means there's something more important to it. Maybe there are other layers. Can you give me some questions that you ask during coaching sessions to uncover some of these, let's say, ideas?
So I have a little quiz I ask people, and I ask them to prioritize things. And I say, if you have to pick your health, your family life, your community, and your career, how do you stack them up? Which goes at the top? Where are the priorities? I can tell you that the right priorities are health comes first, mental and physical health, right? So never take a job that's going to either physically or mentally affect your health. Secondly, your family, right? So is this job that I'm considering going to take me away from my loved ones? Am I going to be at the office until 9 o'clock every night, or am I going to have to travel, 15, 16 weeks a year and be away from my family? In my instance, I'm an immigrant. My sister lives in France, I'm going to go and visit her at least once a year. That's non-negotiable, or she'll come here or something like that. So again, I wouldn't put myself in a position where I couldn't do that. Third is community, whether it be your church or your golf club or your yacht club or fishing or the elk club or whatever it is that you like in your community. Are you going to be able to do those things? Are you going to be able to see and be in the places that you like? And I put career at number 4. Because, and I can give you an example, at Oracle, I coached a senior vice president on his 3rd marriage. The fishing lodge, I think the second wife got, probably 30, 40 pounds overweight, and he literally had blood vessels like bursting on the side of his head most days I saw him, right?
It's stressed.
But making a killing as a VP at Oracle, boy, very, very financially successful. I was miserable, like really miserable. And I did manage to help that particular individual about, well, let's get back to health, family, and community. You don't see your kids. Your health is pretty dodgy. You're eating a lot of rich food and traveling a lot and stuff like that. You never go to your fishing lodge. You're never in your community. But the career is going great, right? And when you kind of reshape it for people like that and say, well, without your health and your family, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you're probably not going to be very happy. And if you're not amongst the people in your community, the like-minded people or the sort of things you enjoy, again, work becomes everything. The career just becomes everything. So I always took a very steep and deep interest in people's health activity. For instance, I bought fresh fruit every single day for my team. I just became a thing. There was never a lack of fresh fruit in our office. I was very, very insistent that they took their vacation time when they could, and if they could. And a lot of times we even sent people home at Christmas when they were, immigrants like me. We'd say, well, look, maybe we'll help you out with a plane ticket and go home and visit your family for Christmas. I mean, spending $300 or $400 on a plane ticket can buy you loyalty like you wouldn't believe. I remember even getting a note back from his parents, thank you so much. We weren't expecting him home for Christmas, and then, community, like I say, a lot of sales guys, obviously, we like to play golf, right? And there's certain sports and things like that maybe it's you're a football fan or you like to go to, the game and that kind of stuff. But a lot of people early in their careers will sacrifice those things, right? So I've got to work, got to stay focused, only 6 months in the job, probably shouldn't take that extra couple of vacation days. The startups I worked with that had, unlimited vacation, that's where people took the least vacation of all. Like
exactly.
So, you're right. It's back to really simple things, right? Really simple things: health, family, things around you, and don't overcomplicate it, I guess is my theory.
It really, back to what you mentioned about the right incentive. So it's not always, a dollar, sign there, right? You care about the person by knowing them personally and say, hey, I send you to your family during the holiday, and that's how you build loyalty. So, and you also mentioned about like behavior change. So that specific example about the VP. So obviously he's very successful. He's most probably been in the seat for, I don't know, 20 odd years and killing it, right?
Yeah.
Shifting that mindset is very difficult. So you got it to the point that that person was open enough to hear some other perspectives, like you talk
Yeah.
about family, health, community. Then that opens up that door to explore other opportunities rather than just only focus on one horizon. Okay, only work, only money.
Yeah.
But how do you make sure that they actually exercise? You said, look, with dogs, we practice, we change behavior by positive reinforcement, but repetition. How do you make sure? Because this is beyond just sales practice. Go write 10 personalized email or do 100 calls or let's focus on your skills. How do you really help people shift their mindset for something beyond what's very obvious?
Yeah, I'm afraid it's the same answer I gave you earlier on, which is about personal, individual achievement. So my coaching sessions sometimes an hour long, and it'll just be me asking question after question after question. Well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well,
Mm-hmm.
what would be ideal? You know, in a perfect world, where would you live? What kind of home do you want to have? It's easier when people have a particular passion.
Mm-hmm.
I remember working with one sales rep at Riverbed who drove race cars and was
Mm-hmm.
crazy into race car driving, which is a really expensive thing to do if you're not sponsored or anything like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But he worked like crazy because he wanted to be a race car driver, and he is, but you know, like an amateur or weekend kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? And when people have very vivid, clear desires or loves, right? Just off the top of my head, trying to think back in Ireland, people love to fish. You know, a lot of people's sort of dream life is a little cottage on the west of Ireland on a lake, right? They just grab a Guinness and go out and fish for the
That's the way to
afternoon,
go.
right? Well, I would get them to open up Zillow and
Mm-hmm.
in their coaching appointment and start looking around. And how much is that? Well, there's one there for 150. You know, well, when
Mm-hmm.
do you think that could be achievable? Like you're going to need 30,000 as a down payment. You know, you could maybe rent it out over the summer and get some income from it too. But and I would actually work with them on their individual goals. And I would just
Mm-hmm.
say to them, really, just keep thinking about that cottage over in Mayo.
Mm-hmm.
Have a picture of it maybe on your wall or something, and just keep reminding yourself that you're doing this for a reason. I'm a big
Mm-hmm.
Simpsons fan. It's a little bit off kilter, but I used to show this in my classroom all the time. And one of the very first episodes of The Simpsons, Homer working out the nuclear power plant where he's completely miserable. At the very end of the episode, he just has a little picture of Maggie, and it says
Mm-hmm.
"Do it for her," and he had it written on his wall in front of him. And I actually show that clip in my classroom sometimes, and I say, "Look, you need to remember why
Mm-hmm.
you need to do this particular thing or learn this particular skill or improve at this particular part of your game, right? There has to be a why. If it's just to get a bigger paycheck and you haven't thought about what you're going to spend that paycheck on,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of useless to you, right? Because let's imagine it's 100,000 you want in the bank, and then you get to your 100,000 and you realize the thing you wanted to buy was 200,000. Right? Like, well, that didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to be so specific or as close to specific as possible. And by the way, the other running joke is, and I remember a rep saying this to me one time, is like, not everybody has a dream, right? Here in America, you'd almost believe that every
That's
single
sad though.
person has automatically got a dream by the time they're 5 or 6 years old. I think when I was 5 or 6 years old, my dream was to be able to buy as much McDonald's as I wanted. It wasn't a very lofty dream at that point. So later in life is often when people actually see the things that they think, oh, you know what, that'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
So re-exploring that idea with adults as opposed to your childhood dream. Well, what's your adult dream?
Mm-hmm.
What would be perfect? What would be great in every possible way right now? And then any of the steps that you have to take to get in that direction become a little bit easier, I think.
This is really powerful because you can hold people accountable because it's their dream or vision or whatever they plan to get. But just imagine if you have someone who does not, you said it, some people say, hey, I don't have a dream. Or maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know. How would you navigate that? Like, how does that conversation should go? Because to your point, not everybody come and say, hey, I want a car.
Yeah. I guess it varies, and it varies wildly from place to place. So I spent half of my career in Europe, Middle East, Africa, Asia, and the latter half of it here in the US. And it's very different, right? It's very different. I mean, I worked with 45-year-old SDRs in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So here in America, nobody would dream of being an SDR at 45. These people loved what they did. They were perfectly satisfied with the income they were making. They didn't want the pressure of taking on account management and all that, maybe losing their role every year, And they got better and better at it, so they crush it all the time. And they're SDRs or BDRs, and with grown kids. And nobody would think there's anything that unusual about that in certain parts of Europe, but here would be, really unusual, right? It's like if you're not moving up, if you're not advancing, it's almost like you're failing. And then there's a lot more into it than that. And I think you know this as well. You're like me, a bit of a mutt. We're in Europe, we're not so focused on just the cash, the big bonuses, right?
Mm-hmm.
People are, for the most part, happy with a modest, safe, nice life, right?
That's the
Not
best thing.
everybody is trying to be a billionaire.
No, I feel you, man. We spent a year in Europe, and it's a completely different, culture. You want to live in the moment. You want to enjoy your, safety, your good weather, and good beer and wine. And I think I personally really like it, but so many other people, again, to your point, in North America, they're really, money focused, and which is fine. People have different goals.
Yeah.
And so, look, we talk about coaching right now, and funny enough, we are not even talking about like tactical stuff. We are not saying, hey, let's talk about your numbers. Let's talk about your skill gaps. Because I think one of the problems with the way we run coaching sessions is that we turn them to not necessarily only pipe reviews, but we really focus on the benefit for the business, not for the person in front of us. So for leaders who are actually listening to this, is there any framework? Is there any way they can start, shifting that behavior? Because it's very difficult when you're used to practice, certain things. Breaking that habit as a leader yourself, that requires some practice. What are there any practices you could share?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan and user of surveys, and always anonymous. Never ask people to put their name in a survey because you just won't get what you need. So every company I've worked at, I usually had to overrule HR, and I said, I'm not going to do a survey if you're going to make people write their names down, right? So, and then I would ask unusual questions in those surveys. Not just the standard, 5 grade of, how satisfied are you? None of that. I would ask like open questions. So please make a suggestion here below for how we could improve X or Y or Z, right? And then amazingly, you'd find out that a lot of the team had been talking before because you'd see the same things coming up in the survey. We're like, okay, if 6 people out of 14 here have all suggested the same thing, they're kind of thinking about that a little bit. So I would do surveys probably quarterly. I can't remember. In different places it would be on a different cadence, but I do quarterly surveys of all of the people in the Rev work, including like biz ops and finance and stuff like that. But just about how can we make this a smoother operation? How can we streamline the communication between, for instance, sales and leadership? Things like Salesforce, right? CRM, I've yet to meet a really good instance of Salesforce being executed really well in my career, but I'm sure there are some, but I just haven't seen any. And that was almost always a gripe, way back even into the 90s when we used something called ACT at the time, right? So, which is pre-Salesforce, pre-everything. And just big surprise, everyone hated that too. So it's finding out what, again, mostly speaking about sales reps here, but finding out about what will make their day and life and week better, what will make it easier. And, by easier, I don't mean they get to be more lazy. I mean, they get to be more efficient. They get to do the tasks that they don't enjoy first thing in the week, for instance. I used to do a role play every Monday when I was at Oracle, and it was called The Worst Customer in the World. And I'd sit all the reps down and I'd say, all right, for the next 5 minutes, this is a HR free zone, and you get to abuse the person in your role play like you've never before, right? So, and we're not recording anything here, but let them have it. And it was always hilarious, of course, But immediately after that, I would say, okay, right, that's the worst sales call you're going to have this week is already taking place. So things are only going to get better after this, right? So, front loading tasks that you don't like to do, our plan always just relaxes the whole team for the rest of the week, month, year. That's why planning in January or whenever your fiscal year starts is so critically important, that you're not planning 3 months before your fiscal year starts. It's going to start slow, right? And again, I've seen this happen where it creates nervousness and angst amongst the team. If there aren't timely territory alignment, stuff like that, it can carry all the way through the team. And, back to you never get what is the phrase? You only get one chance to make a first impression, right? Well, so it's the same, I think, with kicking off a fiscal year anywhere. You get one chance to set a good tone and a good mood and get it moving. And it's going to be harder after that.
And to your point, you don't want to surprise your team, especially salespeople. You can't be all over the place. So the clear expectations. And you mentioned about efficiency too. I think that opens up the final question I have for you. Like, you've been a coach for a very long time. You've been an enablement professional for a long time, and also you work with dogs. So this is your day-to-day, I would say. What are your thoughts on AI?
When I finished my book, I did run it through ChatGPT, right? I thought, okay, let's see what it's going to do. I ran it through ChatGPT, and it was awful. It was just an experiment. I'd never had planned to do it, but when I'd actually finished the draft that I was comfortable with, I asked ChatGPT to make it funnier. I asked it to make it more business-like. I asked it to do all sorts of things. And it just left me cold, honestly, because the phrasing and the wording and just the shape of everything is just so predictable when it's AI generated. Now, with regards to using it as a tool, I don't have a lot of experience with that anyway, so I'm probably not the right person to ask. And I know a lot of people in Salesforce and Oracle and that don't go a day without it, right? With some AI part of their role. Me, I've always thought that sales was a very personal business, and as soon as you start using automation to communicate, you take out that personal touch, right? And as I say, I think that most people are savvy now and can work out when something's been generated, and the sequence that was triggered 6 months ago, all that kind of good stuff. But that's me. I'm an old Irish guy, and I'm kind of a bit of a Luddite when it comes to AI.
I get your point. Look, we are an AI company ourselves, so some of the things that you're saying, I completely get it, because the way you prompt, for specific use cases, it might sound horrible, like very, very awful. But at the same time, when we are looking at efficiency, and I'm not talking about like using AI for automated emails or messaging, all that stuff. Like, for now, at least, I'm against it too. I receive it, I can spot it, it's not authentic, I don't want to deal with that person. Spam, goodbye. But for other aspects of things that we historically couldn't actually provide to our reps, we're talking coaching, we are talking these role plays that you're saying as part of a culture for a company who already have, who has actually implemented this for a long enough time that turns to be part of a process. But many companies don't have this luxury. They don't know how to actually go through these practices, let's say role play or coaching. I wanted to mostly hear about a specific use case for leaders to help with efficiency, whether it comes to practice, when it comes to coaching. I would ask this: which part of, let's say, coaching cannot be automated whatsoever?
So that's a great question, and brings me up to Gong. Gong is my game-changing tool. For however long it's been around. Really, I was on their advisory board for a while. That to me was fantastic. Simple things like 2x playback meant I could listen to a 1-hour demo in 30 minutes. Right, fantastic. That is immediate efficiency for me. Right, and then I could obviously look for keywords. Right, so question marks, things like that. I could take an overview if I didn't have time to listen to an entire call or a series of calls. I could just ask it, well, count how many questions were asked, what's the talk ratio between the customer and so that kind of stuff is super useful if you have, 25 people you're supporting and you really don't have that hour to sit with each and every one of them every single week, right? My rule, and might be a good place to send off because I love people to remember this. My rule has always been that I manage down and not up. So every job I've ever had, Oracle, Mongo, Riverbed, all of those places, at my interview with my boss, I've told them this. I've said, I want to make something very clear right now. If I have a coaching appointment with one of my reps and you ask me to drop it and do something else, I'm going to say no. Because the single most important meeting that my rep has every week isn't with a customer, it's with me. And if I commit that I'm going to spend this hour with them every single week, and then I go, oh, hey, can we move that to Tuesday, or can we punt that? I'm basically saying to them, you're not as important to me as something else. And a lot of times the something else is, like I say, a fire drill from the boss.
Mm-hmm.
So I've come to blows with a couple of those bosses about this, where they said, look, I really need you to can't you just move it? He won't mind. And I was like, I know he won't mind. I'll mind.
Mm-hmm.
I've made it clear to them that they are my priority. They are my number one priority, and that I will help them in any way I can. And if you push me off that priority for your priority, I'm breaking my word to them, and I'm breaking trust. So touch wood, a decade or so later, I get emails occasionally from people who I haven't spoken to or worked with in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll refer to that. They'll say, you were the only boss who never missed a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
never missed a meeting. And it's not actually a very hard thing to do. That they go on red on my calendar. Everything else is green or purple. And if it's a direct report, no, I won't move it for anything. And I think that's a very simple leadership model, it's managed down. Like, you're responsible for those reps, for those people. The other phrase I love is that, sales leaders are not responsible for the number. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the number. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, sort of same message.
Look, I love this. Again, it requires leadership skills and also a servant mindset by saying, hey, I bring impact to someone's life. I'm responsible for my word, and it might cost my job even, because it might, in so many organizations, if they don't have these coaching cultures, or if they truly don't care about the people and it's only about numbers or, their own agenda, that could bring in some consequences to people who actually care. Anyways, look, yeah, I really do appreciate you joining. Like, I enjoyed this conversation. If someone wants to reach out, can they, and how?
So there's two ways. It's ianspandow.com for my professional business, and it's spandowhouse.com for our dog rescue. You could also go onto Amazon and buy my book, Rescuing Dogs and Salespeople, and all of the profits from that book go directly to the 3. So it's where you can donate and read about some of the stories and the trip I took from Dublin, Ireland to Grass Valley, California.
Amazing, man. I checked your YouTube video, by the way, before the podcast, before this episode we're recording, and I loved it. You have this massive, yard, and dogs are walking around, so definitely people go check that out as well. All right.
Sorry, I should have mentioned TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube.
There we go. All right, man. Good chatting with you, and until next time. Bye for now.
Appreciate it. Take care.
Cheers.